and as you've seen from the evening, puppies, babies,
everything,
different, summer camp causes, artists like you've seen,
otters,
museums,
save the otters,
friends
of
otters, and the domestic, the Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, and these other agencies that are in place to help us when we need help in unique ways. And we actually have on the line Devon Chaffee, who is the executive director of the ACLU of New Hampshire, which is, as you probably all know, is dedicated to preserving individual rights and liberties guaranteed in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Probably no singular more important role than preserving our rights. And good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And tell us a little bit about your efforts at the ACLU and what donations to you would mean to the citizens of New Hampshire.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here tonight among such really amazing organizations that we have across the state. It's just so wonderful to be here. So the ACLU of New Hampshire, as you mentioned, we're dedicated to protecting civil liberties and civil rights in the Granite State. We have over 9,000 members statewide. We work out of our Concord office, but you'll really find us in communities across the state, organizing in courthouses as well as at the State House. And we really work on a very broad range of issues, everything from immigrant rights to voting rights to LGBTQ rights, women's rights, reproductive rights. A very broad range of civil liberties and civil rights issues. And I think it's important to think about when we think about what individual contributions mean to us. We don't receive any government funds. We are solely funded through individual donations. We are solely funded through individual gifts. And so it's really just the generosity of our donors that allow us to do the work that we do, that allow us to bring cases on behalf of immigrants that are detained right over in Dover, New Hampshire, right at the Stratford County Jail, and to protect their rights, to protect individuals that are being held in emergency rooms. We just recently won a case at the New Hampshire Supreme Court on behalf of individuals who may be in mental crisis that are being detained without due process in emergency boarding rooms. It's what allows us to take action to protect voting rights of every eligible individual in the state of New Hampshire. It's really individual donations that allow us to do this.
Devon, so in the last year, how did you at the ACLU, did you pivot at all? And I mean, you had to pivot in some way to sort of continue to do the things that you do. How did you adapt in 2020?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I have to say, there was so much more work to do in some ways as COVID-19 came on, as we had to deal with the aftermath of that. We filed a major class action lawsuit on behalf of the immigrant detainees at Stratford County Jail who were being held in a congregate setting in a detention center, which is so dangerous. And remember, these are individuals that haven't been convicted of any crime. That were being detained on civil immigration charges and essentially having their lives put at risk early on in the pandemic in these detention centers. And so we were able to get dozens of these individuals released, especially those individuals who were at risk. So that's one area where we were more active. Another area where we were active is on voting rights, because all of a sudden there was this question of, are people going to feel comfortable during the pandemic of going to the polls? And so we pushed hard to get the governor and the attorney general to issue an allowance to allow very expanded access to the polls through absentee voting, which happened this year. And then we really worked hard to make sure that everybody in the state knew how to go about voting absentee through postcards. We had our volunteers calling people on the phone, thousands and thousands of calls throughout the state, making sure that everybody could access the polls during this past year.
Over the last, say, 10 years, Devon, do you feel like the job, considering that this is about preserving civil rights and individual liberties, here in New Hampshire, is your job getting harder? Is it getting any easier? Is it about the same as it was 10 years ago? How would you assess how the ACLU's missions mesh with the sort of live free or die mentality of New Hampshire?
Oh, that's such a good question, because I think when I first moved to New Hampshire about 10 years ago, I thought about it as being a state that really embraced civil liberties and to a large extent. That would be a really interesting place to work on these issues. And that had a history of doing so. Certainly, the work has changed for our organization. We've gone from being a 3-person organization when I first moved to the state a decade ago to being a 13-person organization with an established legal department and an established organizing department doing all of this work. But in some ways, I have to say that this work is certainly not getting easier. And over the past 6 months, I would say it has, in fact, gotten a lot harder. The types of obstacles that we are seeing right now in the state of New Hampshire are really daunting. I would say, for example, just last week, we saw the New Hampshire Senate pass a budget that included a provision that would censor really important conversations about race and gender and equity. And this is targeting public employees, and it's targeting our schools. And 6 months ago, I have to say that this type of conversation around equity and inclusion and implicit bias, that wouldn't have been controversial at the state of New Hampshire. It wasn't political in the state of New Hampshire, regardless of your party. And now I have to say that it is, just as it is, as we are seeing, being made political in state after state around the country. And I think that's something that we at the ACLU of New Hampshire are really committed to continuing to work on, and something that we're all going to have to work on going forward.
Devon Chaffee, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work that you do with the ACLU, and the very best of luck to you in the future.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You too. Thank you.
You as well.